Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. Today we talk about Elisha and the bears on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Okay, when we talk about this passage in 2 Kings chapter 2, we are talking about what's in many ways a very controversial passage because how this is portrayed is that these kids come out, they sling insults at Elisha, and then he calls some bears out to kill this group of children. But that's really not what's going on in this passage. So what we're going to do in today's episode is we're going to read through 2 Kings chapter 2. We'll go from verses 14 to 24, and then talk about what exactly is going on in the passage. Okay, we'll start now with reading 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 14 to 24. And the text reads, quote, "He took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and struck the waters and said, 'Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?' And when he also had struck the waters, they were divided here and there, and Elisha crossed over. Now, when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho opposite him saw him, they said, 'The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha.' And they came to meet him and bowed themselves to the ground before him. They said to him, 'Behold, there are with your servants 50 strong men. Please let them go and search for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has taken him up and cast him on some mountain or into some valley.' And he said, 'You shall not send.' But when they urged him until he was ashamed, he said, 'Send.' They sent therefore 50 men. They searched 3 days, but did not find him. They returned to him while he was staying at Jericho, and he said to them, 'Did I not say to you, do not go?' Then the men of the city said to Elisha, 'Behold now, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my lord sees, but the water is bad, and the land is unfruitful.' He said, 'Bring me a new jar and put salt in it.' So they brought it to him. He went out to the spring of water and threw salt in it and said, 'Thus says the Lord, I have purified these waters. There shall not be from there death or unfruitfulness any longer.' So the waters have been purified to this day, according to the word of Elisha, which he spoke. He then went up from there to Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, the young lads came out from the city and mocked him, saying, 'Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!' When he looked at him and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number." Okay, so that's the text, and it's a very, very interesting text in many ways. Let's start getting into this. And you can't really take the story of the bears without talking about Elijah's commissioning, because it's all one narrative. The 2 narratives are actually combined. It would be like skipping half a novel and then just reading the end. Okay? So, what happens earlier in 2 Kings chapter 2 is Elijah is taken up into heaven in a chariot of fire. And Elisha says, "Okay, I'm going to pick up Elijah's mantle." Now, first thing he does in verse 14 is a water miracle. In fact, his first couple acts as prophet is water magic. And this is why really, really important that we understand this, is that in ancient times, one proof that you were a prophet was your ability to manipulate water. Water bending. He's a water bender. So, in verse 14, Elisha struck the waters, and the waters were divided, and he crossed the river. Okay? And he crossed the river near the fords of the Jordan. So this is where this is all taking place. Now we have to understand geographically, Jericho is one of the lowest places on planet Earth. You can only go up essentially from Jericho. So he does this water magic. He crosses the fords of the Jordan, and then the sons of the prophet who were at Jericho. Now, the sons of the prophet, this is the school of the prophets. Okay, so when you see that reference to the sons of the prophets, these are, say, a school of the prophets, basically a school that taught you how to be a prophet, or taught you how to support prophets if you had no gift for it. So this is the school of son prophets. They're at Jericho, and they see Elisha do this thing, this great sign and wonder. And they also were witness to what happened to Elijah. So they see Elisha coming, and they come to meet him, and they bow down before him. Okay? And they said to him, they don't really know what happened. Okay, they don't really know what happened. They saw Elijah being taken away. And they said to him, okay, we got 50 good men. We got 50 valiant men, strong men, armed men. Let's go look for your master. Maybe the Spirit of the Lord has taken him up and thrown him against a mountain or into some valley like a rag doll. That's really what they're implying here. Is the Lord picked up Elijah and then drop kicked him. Okay? Because they don't know, they've never seen this happen. They don't know what's going on. And Elisha has just said, yeah, you don't send them. It's a waste of time. Don't do it. Because Elisha knows the score here. He knows what's going on. It's just a waste of time. And so the 50 men still, they're quite distressed over this. They say, hey, let us go. Let's search. And he said, okay, you go do it. You're not going to find anything, but you go do it. So that's what they do in verse 17, is these 50 men go out and they search the hills and the valleys. And then verse 18, they returned while Elisha was staying at Jericho, and they said, they didn't find him. And Elisha basically said, I told you so. He said, did it not say, do not go? That's essentially Elisha's way of saying, I told you so. Okay, so then, the men of the city come to Elisha and say, in verse 19, behold, the situation in the city is pleasant as the Lord sees, but the water is bad and the land is unfruitful. Okay, so something's gone wrong with the water. And Elisha says, bring to me a new jar, put salt in it. So they brought this jar of salt to him. Verse 21, he goes out to the spring of water, threw salt in it, and said, thus says the Lord, I have purified these waters. There shall not be death or unfruitfulness any longer. And verse 22, so the waters have been purified to this day, according to the word of Elisha, which he spoke. So this is, again, a second act of water magic. So the men of Jericho are fully believing Elisha here. They see what happened from their view across the Jordan. They see that this is a guy who has major proof that he is a prophet. Water magic was considered to be really, really compelling evidence that you had the power of a prophet. It goes right back to Moses. Moses divides the water and the people pass through the Sea of Reeds. And many prophets could show what they were capable of by doing water magic. And Jesus is no different in that he shows he has the prophetic power by, first of all, turning the water into wine and then walking on the sea. To an ancient Israelite, seeing somebody perform water magic like this, I don't mean magic as in it's a trick. I don't mean that way. And I don't mean magic in the sense that it's something that's pagan, but it is something that we would not encounter in normal life. So here we have Elisha performing two acts of water magic. He basically parts the Jordan River and crosses, and he purifies a spring. So that is all very, very important to the lead up with the bears. Because by verse 22, his credentials are established as a bona fide prophet of God. So from there, he goes up to Bethel. And as he's going up, by the way, the young lads came out of the city and mocked him, saying, "Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." All right? Now, these young lads are not children, okay? They're na'ar, okay? In the Hebrew, the word is na'ar. Na'arim they're not children. They're teenagers. This is a gang of punks, okay? Now, every society has had gangs of youths who would often cause trouble. That's what's going on here. Is this gang of young punks, of teenage punks, and a Na'ar can even be as old as in their 20s. Okay, so this is a group of hot-headed young men, a gang, and they say to him in verse 23, "Go up." Now, what they mean here by "go up" isn't go up by elevation. It's going up ritually. So he's already at Bethel. Okay, once you're in Bethel, you're already in the Judean foothills. Okay? So geographically, they're already at a high elevation. But they're saying go up in the ritual sense. So go up into the temple ritually. And this is the temple at Bethel, temple of Yahweh, an unauthorized temple. Okay? This is what we would call in the ancient texts a high place, a place where aberrant Yahweh worship was done. This is a no-no for a prophet. A prophet knows you do not go and worship in a high place. That's a definite no-no. You only go to the place that is prescribed by the prophets of the Lord. And that was already at this time established to be Jerusalem. So the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem was the only bona fide Yahweh worship at the time. But these young punks are coming out of Bethel and telling this real prophet, go up into the temple at Bethel. Go up and worship there, you bald head. They're not just being taunting or obnoxious. They're being menacing. There's a death threat underlying this mockery. So it starts as mocking, but it usually ends up in stoning. And that's how this is culturally going to play out. If they don't get his way, if he just ignores them, because there's no police back then, there's nobody to protect him. The 50 strong men that were with him originally were back in Jericho. So he's alone. He's by himself here. And this gang is coming out and starting with mockery. Then someone will eventually throw a stone. And after that, they'll stone him to death. That's generally how this works. Okay? So this is a mockery, but there's the subtext of a death threat here. Okay? Again, this is something the biblical writer just expects you to know. He expects you to know that there's a death threat here because that's how mob violence works. And this is a kind of mob violence with 42 teenagers who are up to no good. Okay? So it just expects you to know this. Now, verse 24. When he looked behind him and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Now, this is a ritual curse. He's bringing down on them a ritual curse. This is also something that you are expected to know. This is not, he's not just cussing them out here. He's not using profanity against them. He's using a ritual curse where he is appealing to a deity to do harm to these punks. Okay? It's not bad language. It's not a hope. It's an appeal to deity to take action. And it's done in, as I say, a magical incantational way, but it is done in the name of the Lord. Then, verse 24 continued, then 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number. Now, we're not told how many of their number there were. Okay? But boy versus bear. Okay, you're not going to fare well. Okay, it's not going to end well for you. Okay? So there's a presumption in this text that the number of teenagers here, punks, were much more than 42. So the 42 is just what the 2 bears could get their hands on. Yeah, 42 to over 42 to 1. Those aren't great odds. But over 42 to 2 bears, okay, those numbers even out. Okay? But these aren't just any bears. These are covenant bears. And to understand this, we need to go to Leviticus 26. Verses 3 to 6, and I'll read starting at verse 3. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments so as to carry them out, then I shall give you rains in their season, so that the land will yield its produce, and the trees of the field will bear their fruit. Indeed, your threshing will last for you until grape gathering, and grape gathering will last until sowing time. So you're going to get a continuous supply of food here. You will thus eat your food, the full, and live securely in your land. I will also grant peace in the land, so that you may lie down and no one making you tremble. I shall also eliminate harmful beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through your land. Okay, so the point of Leviticus 26, verses 3 to 6, is that if you walk in the way of the Lord and keep his statutes, you'll have plenty. Your harvests will last from the beginning of threshing all the way to the end of the season. You will have plenty of rain. Your crops will flourish and grow. You will have food. You will be safe. No one will bother you in the land. And the Lord will eliminate the harmful beasts. But if you don't behave, you get covenant bears. Okay? So what Elisha is doing here in 2 Kings chapter 2 is he's falling back upon this covenant promise of Leviticus 26, that you have safety as long as you keep covenant. You worship in the high places, such as in the temple of Yahweh at Bethel. All right, you are now breaking the covenant. And at that point, it's at that point you will no longer have safety. You will no longer have the rains, and the harmful beasts will come and beat up your teenagers. Okay? And this is all part of covenant promise. So, what we have overall in this narrative, Elisha and the bears, is Elisha being established as a prophet. He does 2 acts of water magic, proving he's has the prophetic power, and 1 act of covenant judgment. And this is what's going to establish his reputation as a prophet. This is his first acts, his first deeds as a prophet, to establish his authority. Basically, proof he's a prophet through water magic and restoration is part of that water magic. The second thing is he invokes the judgment caused by violation of the Lord's covenant. Okay? So, anyway, we hope you learned something from that and found that interesting. thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.